All right, ladies and gentlemen, you are locked on Falcons. I'm your host, Aaron Freeman, and today I am joined by the co-host of the ATL Day Ones podcast, Jarvis Davis, uh, on the Locked On Sports Atlanta podcast feed. We're going to be talking about the Falcons and what to watch for at OTAs, Deion Jones's future, and whether or not the Falcons still have one more roster move to make on the offensive or defensive lines.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
So, guys, you know me. I'm Aaron Freeman. Been covering the Falcons for many years, formerly at FalcFans.com, RIP, still going strong on Twitter at FalcFans, and, of course, the host of this illustrious Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of the Locked On Sports Atlanta podcast family. And I want to thank everyone that makes Locked On Falcons their first listen each and every day. Locked On Falcons is free and available Monday through Friday on a variety of podcast platforms, including Apple, Odyssey, Google, Spotify, as well as the video version of the podcast on YouTube. If you subscribe to the Locked On Falcons YouTube channel, give us a like when you do. You'll get the video version of the podcast the night before the audio drops. And if you're watching us on YouTube, you notice I'm still holding my microphone because my microphone stand broke. And if you're listening to us, I apologize in advance if the audio is a little wonky, as my hand shakes as I talk and the volume changes each and every time. But yesterday it wasn't too bad. So hopefully we'll have another good day. And I know we'll have a good day because I'm joined by one half of the ATL Day Ones podcast. That is, of course, Jarvis Davis. You hear him every single day on Locked On Sports Atlanta podcast feed alongside Tanitra Batiste. And of course, you know, you're also checking out the other great shows on Locked On Sports Atlanta, like A to Z with Mark Zeno and Hitting Harder with John Chuckery. But Jarvis is here with us once again to talk a little bit about OTAs. First of all, I want to say, Jarvis, welcome back to Locked On Falcons. And then my first question for you is sort of what should fans be paying attention to this time in the calendar year where the Falcons have, you know, several weeks of OTAs followed by a mandatory minicamp? What's sort of at stake for the Falcons at this point in time in the calendar?
I think the first thing that comes to mind is like what the rookies look like with the veterans, you know, with the veterans around, because I think that's a big key, right? Because you have the rookie minicamps where it's just guys are in the same boat, right? You know, I'm here trying to prove myself if I'm an undrafted free agent, or I'm here trying to, you know, make the squad if I'm a low level rookie, or I'm a veteran trying to, you know, make a squad like a Geronimo Allison or something like that. But now you have guys that are established in the locker room as well, and as well on the field. So I think how the rookies kind of interact with the vets, and if you still see Desmond Ridder taking that leadership role while if he gets some first team reps, you know, or even with the backups, like how does he carry himself with all of the veterans on the field in the huddle? Does he command the huddle still like he did when there was nothing but other rookies out there? So that's one thing. And then also defensively, man, I think this is kind of a storyline that many people haven't really been talking about like that. And I know you probably touched on this. I'm really interested to see Jalen Hawkins and Richie Grant really just take that combination to the next level, because we saw some things with Richie Grant and how he, you know, struggled to get on the field. And then you saw him kind of integrate himself into the lineup, you know, in a nickel spot. You know, he was drafted to be a safety in the second round, but he was a guy that came in and gave you some solid work at the nickel because that's where they needed him. Isaiah Oliver was done for the season, so they were like, hey, go down there and play nickel. So, and I think he did a solid job coming in. And I think Jalen Hawkins played himself into some snaps as well last year. And I really think that would be a solid safety combination if those guys figure that thing out, because Jalen Hawkins is a guy that he's a playmaker, and I know for a fact that Richie Grant is a ball hawk. And I think seeing him get settled into that free safety role, and Hawkins kind of roaming around and doing this thing out there making some big hits on the field, I think that's something to kind of keep an eye on as OTAs get rolling.
Yeah, I think you make some great points. Obviously, you get an opportunity for some of these young guys to really get their first exposure to some of the veterans and sort of seeing what they can sort of glean from those guys. But you're right with the safety group. That's going to be a big question mark for this team because when you look at the cornerback room, you have some proven players there. The
Upgrades.
linebacker, we've had some turnover at that position, but you had several guys there that have NFL starting experience in this league with guys like Rashaan Evans. We'll talk about whether Deion Jones is going to be there coming up. But you also bring in Nick Kwiatkowski, who's been a longtime veteran. And we know that we have some pieces up front that they're working with, but that safety group is a big question mark, right? We have
Right.
high hopes for Jalen Hawkins. We have high hopes for Richie Grant. We saw what Eric Harris could do last year. They pick up Dean Marlowe, a guy that has some veteran experience, can be sort of an effective dime safety as he was for several years with the Buffalo Bills. But you just don't really know what Grant and Hawkins are going to bring as starters. And I think the Falcons are hopeful and optimistic, as I think most fans are, that those two guys will sort of grab the bull by the horns and sort of get this team back to getting good safety play, which we haven't really seen from this Falcons defense in a number of years, really since the heyday of Keanu Neal and Ricardo Allen. And unfortunately, Keanu Neal dealt with injuries, and Ricardo Allen dealt with, I guess you could call it, age at a certain point, as well as injuries. So it'll be interesting to keep an eye on those two guys as the rest of the summer unfolds.
Yeah, and that's the thing about it, because like it seems like for me, defensively, that's where you're gonna see a lot of the young guys. Just you're gonna be counting on a lot of young guys to produce, right? When you think about AJ Terrell, he came to his own last year and started establishing himself as one of those guys. You want to see some upgrades there. Maybe he can get some more work on Sundays because we know it was a lot of balls going Fabian Moreau's way last year. So Casey Hayward is I can vouch for him saying that he's a lot better than Fabian Moreau, and you're gonna get. He probably gonna get some more opportunities to kind of take the ball away, and I think that's where you're gonna start to see his upgrade his game, and obviously on Ebiketie, the second round pick, they traded up for him. So that's a guy you want to see. They're going to be dependent on. Because I think that just the youth all the way around is something they'll be counting on all around over there. Versus the offense. Offensively, there are some guys that you want to see. Play better. Like Jalen Mayfield. Can he play better? As far as Matt Hennessy, can he be the guy to say, hey, you know what, y'all maybe don't need to go out and go pick up another offensive lineman or a veteran guy who's been in the league and knows how to play center. So those are the type of things that you want to see, and is Caleb McGarry going to be the starter? Those are some of the things that you want to keep an eye on. But I think that defensively, though, it's going to be a lot of young guys that you're going to be looking to step up. And I think it starts with, with these practices and OTAs.
Yeah, I agree. Well, we'll circle back to that offensive line and maybe the Falcons needing a veteran on that side of the ball a little bit later on today's episode here with Jarvis Davis. We're going to talk a little bit about Deion Jones and whether or not he is in the Falcons' future plans as we continue today's Locked On Falcons podcast, guys. But of course, Jarvis is here. I got to plug the Locked On Sports Atlanta podcast feed. If you're not checking out ATL Day Ones every single day with Jarvis and Tanitra, you should. You can also check out Hitting Hard with John Chuckery, A to Z with Mark Zeno. These guys are covering all of Atlanta sports, all of Georgia sports, and of course, any sort of national headline making news as well each and every day. And of course, if you subscribe to Locked On Sports Atlanta on YouTube, you'll also get the Atlanta Braves postcast with Locked On Braves breaking down the highs and the lows of every single Atlanta Braves game. And you can find them all on your preferred podcast platform as well as on YouTube. And guys, I want to tell you about Built Bar, the protein bar that tastes just like a candy bar, but in fact is better than a candy bar because Built Bars not only taste good, they're good for you because they're low in sugar, calories, and carbs, but also high in protein and fiber. And right now, Built Bar has their brownie batter puff. I've told you about that. It's the puff flavors of the first protein infused marshmallow, and the brownie batter puff tastes just like licking the bowl when mom used to make those brownies for you. And now that you've gotten a little bit older, people sort of look at you a little funny when you're out there licking the bowl and whatnot. Uh, get the brownie batter puff, and no one will look funny at you anymore. And if that's not interested in you, you can check out the grasshopper cookie, available for part-time. If you like thin mint, that's a great cookie for you. The granola flavors are back, so if you missed an opportunity to try the chocolate coconut, the chocolate peanut butter, or the white chocolate berry, you can find those by heading on over to built.com. And when you do, use the promo code LOCK15 and you'll get 15% off your order. That's promo code LOCK15, LOCKED 15, for 15% off at built.com. So here with Jarvis Davis of the ATL Day Ones podcast, thanking all you guys that make Locked On Falcons and Locked On Sports Atlanta your force listen each and every day. But let's talk about Deion Jones. He's been a topic of frequent discussion these last several weeks, and people have been, speculating about whether or not he is, in his last days here in Atlanta. I guess my question to you, Jarvis, is, do you think Deion Jones will be on the Falcons roster when training camp starts in July?
To be honest with you, I don't think so. And the thing that I'm interested in is how he's not going to be on the roster, right? Are they going to be able to find a suitor for him to be able to trade? Are they going to be able to trade him? Because, everybody's been speculating about Deion Jones not being on this roster. I know I've talked about it ad nauseum on our podcast. I know you've mentioned it, and we've talked about it, being on the podcast as well. So it's just I think the only thing for me is like, we know what we've seen from Deion Jones last year, right? We know he's kind of been on a steady decline ever since he got that bad. And I think that other teams see that too. So, okay, what kind of value does he really have? That's the top. That's what I start. That's the kind of level I'm on as far as what the Falcons can do with him. And are they in a space where they know that everybody is probably not going to value him as well? And would they get to do they feel that if everybody sees that, are they going to be in a space where they just going to cut him and just say, hey, go on about your business, and we'll say what I think is like $1 million on in cap space to do it. So it's just a lot of different factors that I don't think that he's going to be on the roster. I'm just interested to see like how they handle it, and that'll tell you exactly how they feel about Deion Jones as a player.
Yeah. I can't remember if it was in the Jeff Schultz article that he wrote this week at The Athletic, or it was something else I was reading or listening to or something. And I think they were talking about how like there's not going to be a trade market for like Baker Mayfield or Jimmy Garoppolo because every team in the league knows like they're not going to keep those guys. And eventually the 49ers or Cleveland, when it comes to those two guys, are going to have to cut them if they want to get rid of them, and no team's going to give up value. And part of me kind of sits here and thinks that may be the situation with the Falcons next week when I believe next Thursday is June 1st.
June 1st, yep. Mm-hmm.
They can make that roster move, or I guess it's June 2nd. I guess it's technically the day that they can actually cut him. But I'm sitting here because it's been kind of told to me that like the Falcons have been open to moving Deion Jones for over a year now, since this regime came in, and they haven't really gotten any nibbles on that. And I wonder if it's kind of a situation where teams kind of know, well, you're going to cut him, right? Because why should we give up a draft pick when you just can cut him and then we can get him for much cheaper than they would have to by trading for him. So I do wonder, in the same way as you, that if a trade does not develop, are the Falcons just going to sort of cut bait with him at that point in time and just move on? Or are they going to basically, you know, wait and hope that a decent trade develops? And if that's the case, that may be a situation where a decent trade may not develop until we get into the season and the trade deadline, where a team is going to look at some injuries that they may have and say, okay, we need to go out there and get a fast athletic linebacker like Deion Jones. He can help our football team. And we'd be willing at that point because, some, team that's in playoff contention or whatever feels like that's a piece that can keep their season alive. And so I'm the same as you, basically just curious to see how, if Deion Jones is, done playing for the Atlanta Falcons, how sort of his exit manifests.
And you know what? And another thing I was thinking about, almost kind of like how we got here, right? Because, I remember when Deion was drafted with this team, and like I said, been covering this team for some time as well. And it just seems like he just wasn't interested, in the past couple of years. You know what I mean? Because like I've always kind of used Grady Jarrett as an example. When he first came in the league, he was built a certain way, right? And then after his rookie year, he came back into camp and he reported to camp. I was like, dude, this dude like totally changed his body. Because a lot of times when guys come into the NFL, essentially they're just working out combine. They're just being combine warriors. That's all they're working towards, and they're working out as such, right? So, and after that rookie year, they kind of go back to the drawing board and say, okay, here's the specific type of training that I need to do in order to be a better football player, not to be able to run a fast 40. You know what I mean? So, and with Deion, I didn't see that. And his body kind of has been the same since he's been in the league. And, a lot of times, man, when you come in and your best asset is being athletic and being fast, that doesn't necessarily get better with time. You know what I mean? So if you can't run as fast as you used to be able to, you can't stick with Christian McCaffrey, step for step, coming out of the backfield. Like, a lot of times you lose your value. And I think that's what we've seen with Deion Jones. He's lost his value, and you brought in a system that is just not conducive to him being productive. He just can't sustain himself in that system, I believe. Being a 3-4 inside linebacker, I just don't see him being successful there. So I think for me, it's just kind of like, we saw the steady decline. We saw, him not being a fit in that scheme. And then the last piece is, he's not necessarily a leadership guy, right? Grady Jarrett, leader, guaranteed. Jake Matthews, leader. And those are the guys you saw, hey, we want to keep these guys around because we're going to need help, relaying our message. And I never really saw Deion in these past couple of years be that guy. He's kind of a little ornery sometimes when you try to talk to him in the locker room. And I just think that his mannerisms and everything, it just tells me exactly what the Falcons have told you by the guys that they've signed, that, he's on his way out. But, like I said, come June 1st or June 2nd or whenever it goes down, it's just going to be interesting to see how it goes down.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. On those 2 points, like, I think early in Deion Jones's career, he didn't have to change his body or be a certain type of player. And I mentioned this on yesterday's episode when I was talking about Troy Anderson, because like he played on a team that had a really potent offense, right? And so we knew the Falcons could score points, and basically he could just play coverage, right?
Yeah, there you go.
And
it was perfect.
It was trying to throw the ball to get back into the game, and that was what he was really good at, was in coverage. And then I think the last couple of years where you haven't seen that sort of high flying Falcons offense, teams have been able to run the football and be able to stay committed to running the football in the second halves of games. And I think that's kind of exposed his limitations. He's never been a great run defender, but it didn't really matter when the Falcons were scoring, 30 points a game or whatever the case may be, because teams couldn't be committed to running the football all that often. And then the last point on the leadership thing, that's been something I've harped on with Deion Jones over the years, is because of, watching the film and you're seeing a guy that's not necessarily always gap sound or assignment sound when it comes to the run defense.
Right.
Hard to be, a lot of leadership is accountability, right? It's
Yeah.
about, you're accountable to your teammates and whatever things. And it's hard to be that sort of accountability guy in the locker room when anybody watches the film and they're seeing like that guy's not doing his job. How am
Yeah.
I why should I listen to that guy as the leader of this team or the leader of this unit or whatever the case may be, when he's not necessarily doing his job? Why should I be accountable for what I'm doing? And when he chews me out on the sideline, why shouldn't it be in one ear and out the other? Because I'm sitting here thinking like, you're not doing your job either. So like, why you get mad at me or whatever the case may be. And so I think that's been sort of a limiting factor. And I think these two things have sort of collided these last couple of years to make some of these issues that Deion Jones has been having just kind of get more magnified more and more, and you're kind of seeing more of the limitations of Deion Jones than necessarily the strengths of his, which we saw earlier in his career when he didn't have to be that leader, and when he didn't have to be this super physical run defender, because the Falcons' offense was so good, and the offense was their best defense at that point in time.
Yeah, you know what, and the thing that comes to mind when you talking about Deion Jones and is from a leadership standpoint, the two guys I mentioned, right, Jake Matthews and Grady Jarrett, their biggest asset is consistency, right? No matter how you feel, how good or great or rank Jake Matthews is probably one of the left tackles in the league, you know exactly what you're gonna get each and every Sunday. He's gonna be out there damn near every play
by himself, no help,
by himself, no chip.
Yeah, doing his thing. He's like,
exactly,
I got the best pass rusher. I'm all by myself out here.
He may get me one. He maybe get me once, maybe even get me twice. But guess what? Those other 100 snaps or whatever, how many snaps they do in the game, that exactly he gonna hold it down. And then Grady Jarrett, the same thing. You know exactly what you're gonna get from 9-7 every play, each and every Sunday. And like I said, when you have those young guys looking up to you, for that, and they look and see that it's easy to be a leader. Then you can lead by example. You don't really have to say anything. But like you said, Deion Jones hasn't been consistent. He's been up and down. He's been like the stock market, so it's just when you don't have that in place and you weren't necessarily a leadership type guy in the first place, you just kind of led by example by playing really well. It's just a combination for like where we are right now. This is why we're here right now in this moment.
Yeah, I think there's two great points there, two great examples of accountability. Even if Jake Matthews and Grady Jarrett aren't raw leaders, you can't sit there and get mad at them if you're going through the film.
No,
and they're definitely 100% accountable for what they're doing. They're out there busting their tail each and every week. So I think that's a great point there. And speaking of Grady Jarrett and Jake Matthews and the positions that they play on the offensive and defensive lines, we're going to be talking a little bit with Jarvis about sort of which of those two units needs the most help. That if the Falcons have a roster spot opening up, if they do decide to move on from Deion Jones in the next week or two, which side of the ball would Jarvis like to see the Falcons, bolster with that one roster spot? And maybe I'll take the sort of opposite end, and we'll have a little bit of a back and forth here as we continue today's Locked On Falcons, guys. But before we get there, let me tell you about the Locked On Sports Today podcast hosted by Peter Bukowski. If you're trying to get all the sports news covering all of the sports, the biggest headlines, the biggest stories from around the world, you can find that on the Locked On Sports Today podcast on your preferred podcast platform, including on YouTube. So, of course, guys, still here with Jarvis Davis of the ATL Day Ones podcast. Jarvis co-hosts that with the lovely Tanisha Batiste. And I know you guys recently talked about the Falcons adding some help in the trenches this summer before training camp to bolster the roster. I know you talked about bringing in someone like a veteran like JC Tretter to come in and bolster that position. I know she talked about Akiem Hicks. I've mentioned sort of Akiem Hicks as a potential option for the defensive line. So my question for you, Jarvis, is what do you feel like if you have one roster move to make between now and the start of the training camp or the start of the season? Is it more important for the Falcons to bolster the offensive line or the defensive line?
Man, it is so I'm so torn with this one because, like you said, when we talked about this on the show, Tanisha kind of hinted at who she was gonna talk about, but when she said it out loud, I was just like, oh my god, why didn't I say that? You know what I mean? Because like I know what it looks like when that defensive line is humming, man. Because Akiem Hicks is an absolute monster. Now I'm not saying he is what he was when he was 27 years old. I think he's like 32 right now, 31, 32 years old. And I think that's a prime candidate type guy for the Falcons, a 1 year, maybe even a 2 year contract type guy. But the head coach is the offensive coordinator, man. And I know what we saw with that offensive line last year, giving up 40 plus sacks again. You know what I mean? So I think that in order for Arthur Smith's system to work to perfection, they have to be able to run the football. And J.C. Tretter is probably one of the better blocking centers in the NFL. And a lot of people say, well, he got cut, Jarvis. He got cut because the Browns had to make some room for Deshaun Watson. At $230 million, yeah, you got to figure it out, Jack. Wherever you can save, you got to save. And they'll figure out the rest later because the Browns I know they're a horrible organization, but they have been amazing at drafting offensive linemen. My goodness. Like, the Falcons understand how they get down with offensive linemen too, because Post won before, and Alex Mack, I wouldn't mind dipping my toe back in that water again because, like I said, man, the only way Marcus Mariota is going to be successful is that if they're able to run the football. I just don't think that Marcus Mariota can do what Matt Ryan did and squeeze 7 wins out of not having any targets, any viable, proven wide receivers, catching the ball. I know Kyle Pitts came in with some hype, but he still wasn't proven. He was a rookie, and and behind that offensive line and not having a run game. Matt is used to it. He knows how to, work his way around it. I don't think Marcus Mariota can last, if they aren't able to run the football, protect them in 2 ways, by running the football and when he drops back to pass on 3rd down. So, yeah, as much as I want to say, go get Akiem Hicks, man, make that call. He played for the Bears. Yeah, I get it. But if they have an opportunity to choose between the two, I got to go with Tretter. I just got to go with the offensive line because I can't have Matt Hennessy and Jalen Mayfield sitting up there playing next to each other next year because, hey, we saw what that looks like.
Yeah. And normally I would hit you back and say, well, they need this on the no. I will not make that argument today. I will not make the counter argument today. I think you make a great point. This offensive line, if you had told me 6 months ago that they're going to run it back with the same starting 5, I would have been like
seriously, like that's the fascinating part, right? Like they addressed everything on the defensive line. They got 2 edge rushers. They got some linebackers that come in and fill and fit the 3-4 system, and it's just like, all right, you got Justin Schaefer, okay. I mean, he's a mauler, he's a solid run blocker, but he had a little issues here at UGA, like he had to kind of like stick around and work his way into being a legitimate starter. But man, it's very interesting that, they drafted the way they did. And, that's why I wholeheartedly believe that they are waiting around to post June 1 to see what happens. That's why I'm totally confident. I'm 100% confident that Terry Fontenot is going to be working those phones because it is just hard for me to see them bringing that same starting 5 back from last year. I understand Jalen Mayfield. Let it play out. Hey, you drafted him in the 3rd round. You got to see what's going on with him. I get it. But that center, if you get a solid center in there, man, like that makes everybody around him better. Hands down.
Yeah, I think you're right. And particularly if, you talk about Marcus Mariota, but if you're talking about Desmond Ridder, you want to have a veteran center in there for that young quarterback that can make these line calls. And so for me, looking at Hennessy, looking at Drew Dahlman, like I am not as worried about the center spot as I am at other positions. Like the guy, next to them on the offensive line. But like I'm kind of with you. Like the idea of having that pair, that duo, whatever, whoever it is, back to
Man,
back years playing next to each other at left guard and center, to me is it's a pretty big gamble. And
right.
if signing someone like a JC Tretter, you get that veteran center, and whether it's Desmond Ritter who's the long term answer at the quarterback, or the Falcons are dipping back into next year's draft to get their quarterback, having that sort of centerpiece, literally along the offensive line makes a ton of sense if you want to maximize and take some of the pressure off of that young guy to recognize some of those blitz calls and make the adjustments in the blocking, that you want to put that on sort of a veteran center. And it's a big order. If the Falcons don't go out and get someone like JC Tretter, the expectations for Matt Hennessy or Drew Dalman are going to be significant this year. I think
Very,
if
very significant.
if Jalen Mayfield stinks again for a second year in a row, obviously he'll be criticized for it, but I don't think anybody's going to be like, oh, this is terrible. Like, because I don't think the expectations are particularly high for Jalen Mayfield going into year two. But I think for a player like Matt Hennessy, unlike Caleb McGarry, who's in a contract year, and I think people are just kind of like, well, maybe he figures it out, but if he doesn't, then we're moving on next year,
Right, exactly.
But
Yeah.
like Hennessy's a guy, like this is his golden opportunity to either establish himself as a guy that can be the long-term answer here at the center position, or the Falcons are almost certainly going to be looking in a different direction next offseason. It's hard for me to imagine a scenario where the Falcons aren't using all that cap space that they have to really address this offensive line and nip these issues in the bud next spring, if none of these guys can step up and really resolve it. And Hennessy, I think more so than any of these other guys, really has a golden opportunity ahead of him. So part of me is interested to see if he can take advantage of that opportunity and thus give him that chance. And that's why I might lean a little bit more towards going out there and getting a D lineman like Akiem Hicks. But I certainly think you would not hear me complaining on this podcast if the Falcons were to bring in
Right.
someone like JC Tretter.
And and you think about it too, like they ain't even draft a dude. I didn't draft Matt Hennessy. That's why I said, I would prefer, them go for the center spot, because like if you didn't really like what you saw last year, I know a lot of people didn't like what they saw in Matt Hennessy last year. We don't necessarily really know. I guess they like what they saw. I guess they maybe saw some potential in there, but for a guy that you didn't draft, I mean, it's just another, miss for the Thomas Dimitroff and Dan Quinn era, which what we kind of got used to. So, I mean, like make the move, man, to see, because at the end of the day, like you want to be able to establish yourself, you want to be able to establish a certain type of culture, and they've been preaching the whole competition piece, right? We've been hearing Arthur Smith consistently, that be the message coming out of Flowery Branch. That's a spot that I would like to see more competition at, because Drew Dalman is not competition. I'm sorry, you just can't sell me on that one.
Okay, it's fair enough. And Jarvis, I really appreciate your insight and the compelling conversation we had about the Falcons. We'll have to do it again sometime real soon.
I'm always available, my man.
But let the people know, what you and Tanitra got on, on the docket upcoming for ATL Day Ones, and where other places people can hit you up on.
ATL Day Ones, we'll be taking another trip out to Flowery Branch, so we'll be having some live videos, some live footage. We got a lot of good feedback from it when we were out there last time, so we'll be doing it again. They'll be at Mercedes-Benz on June the 3rd, and we'll be live out there trying to see what's going on with the Falcons and the OTAs, and and all I ask, I don't ask for much, Aaron, but I just ask everybody, just give me a follow on Twitter at JarvisD90. Check me out there, man.
All right. Go ahead, smash that like, hit that follow, all that jazz. Jarvis, really appreciate you joining me on today's episode. For Locked On Falcons listeners, what is on deck tomorrow? I don't know. So that's a golden opportunity for you guys to steer the ship a little bit. I think we'll probably talk about post June 1 moves a little bit further, maybe. I don't know. Talk about some of the ongoing free agents. I don't know. We'll figure it out. But if you guys want to sort of steer the ship, of course you can do so by providing your feedback. We might do another mailbag or something like that. You can hit me up on Twitter at Locked On Falcons, on Facebook at Locked On Falcons. You can send an email to lockedonfalcons@mail.com. Of course, you can leave a comment here on the Locked On Falcons YouTube channel. And while you're on submitting those questions to Locked On Falcons on Twitter, go ahead and follow Jarvis D90 on Twitter as well. So, guys, that's maybe what's in store for tomorrow's episode. I really hope you enjoyed today's episode. Until then,